Ryan here with Dark Rangers Inc. and welcome to the new mini studio. I've been setting this up during the week thus far, and we got a brand new desk that I can use as a standing or seated desk, but I don't have a chair yet, so we're working on that. I've got all these booms set up for the lighting, got the microphone and one for my iPad. Should I choose to ever actually use a script, I can look at it right there. And then I've got some sound paneling up and some other lights. I don't know where I'm gonna put them all yet, but it's a work in progress, just like the channel. But I'm actually going to do a different type of video today to kind of christen the new studio. I had planned on doing another processing tutorial on Bill Blanchin and another Astro channel's new script for unscreened stars, but I'm having the same problem as Polyman Astro, where my script just disappeared from Pixinsite. Check out his channel to see what's going on with that. He's been updating as it goes. And so I had wanted to do this one for a long time because those of you that have seen all my videos know there is a travel emphasis to this channel, and for the first couple years in this hobby I only did it from dark sky locations. I didn't do the whole like backyard astro thing until probably like the last year or so, and so that's really my roots in the hobby. And as a result, I've actually been to a lot of really cool places, and I wanted to share those with you. So whether you do get to go out a lot and maybe you can listen and help plan your next location that you want to go to, or perhaps you don't get to go out, then you can live vicariously through me. And then this weekend we're going to do hopefully a dark site video for the new moon. The weather looks a little sketchy. Normally I'd go tomorrow, being Friday, which is actually today. I'm shooting this Thursday night, but the weather looks better for Saturday and Sunday, so hang tight for that. We may or may not do it depending on the weather. And in the meantime, I wanted to just share with you guys kind of a little bit of my story, and doing that through something that we can all appreciate, some really cool Bortle 1 and Bortle 2 sky sites. Alright, so in no particular order, I'm going to share maybe more of a chronological order if anything, and then I will share some images that I took at each place. Some of them only have one or two, and the first one I want to talk about is before I moved to Arizona. So I actually did have to pack everything up and get on a plane for it. I initially started the hobby as just normal photography, landscape photography. I like cars a lot, so I shot that. I was into cars for a lot of years. And so I somehow got an itch to shoot the Milky Way. The more I looked into it, the more kind of like obsessed with the idea I got. And so I'm kind of somebody that likes to go all in on hobbies, and I wanted to find the darkest place possible. And so I Googled several spots, and what I found consistently on a top 5 list of least light polluted skies was Death Valley. And not only did I want to go to Death Valley, but I wanted to find the darkest part within the park. And there's actually a place in the northwest corner called Eureka Dunes, and it's much harder to get to and further from Las Vegas, where I flew into. But I got to LV, hopped in a rental car, and you basically have to drive around the west side of the park. And on one side you have the northern Palisades, and on the other side you have like the desert. And so it's a really cool drive because it's like a two-faced drive the entire way. It's split from one side to the other, and you get to this town up at the northern end of the 5 million acre Death Valley, which I still think is the largest national park in the country, to a little town called Big Pine, California. And there's a little Shell station there where you can shower and get cleaned up if you do an extended stay. And then there's like a 50-mile drive into the park, and it opens up into this big valley surrounded by mountains, and then you just see these massive 700-foot dunes. And I think they are the largest dunes in North America, and if not, they're one of the largest. And right away, like 5 minutes into the trip, you like lose cell service, which is usually a good sign in terms of finding dark skies, but a bad sign when it's 105 degrees in the hottest part of the country and it's mid-May for the new moon. So it was super hot, and I was by myself because, being new to the hobby of photography in general, I didn't have a lot of friends that were willing to hop on a plane and go to a place with death in the name, as you might imagine. So I was going solo, and I've been to Death Valley 4 or 5 times since there, and I've been all over the park, like almost every inch of it. And it's really cool because there's so many little ecosystems. No matter where you go, you're going to get dark skies, and you can even go up to some campsites that are like 8,000 or 9,000 feet of altitude. And so if it is a summer, you can kind of beat the heat by going up to some of those. But I've been there many times. It's fond to my heart, and since it was my first one, it definitely has had to be the first on the list at number 5, Death Valley, specifically the Eureka Dunes. Racetrack Playa is also a really cool place. That's where you get those sliding rocks with the little cracks in the sand that everybody takes images of. It's a great Milky Way foreground. And that's what I was there to do. I was there to shoot the Milky Way. Now, at this point, I had never used a star tracker, and I wasn't going to. I had my D750. I got a 24mm 1.4 lens and a tripod. I looked up the settings that you needed, but really had to do a lot of experimenting, and I just went for it. I ended up climbing up the dunes, which was way more exhausting than it looks like. When you look up, it doesn't look that bad, but you're like walking in sand, and it gets really steep at the top. So it's quite a work. But I brought my camera, and then I sat up there and kind of just like straddled, that in the sand that you see on dunes in the desert, and took photos of the sun setting, and then kind of adjacent to the south is where the Milky Way would come up. But I hiked down and I got my camera on the tripod, set the tent up, and all of a sudden, as it's getting dark, this star field, unlike anything I'd ever seen, like thousands and thousands of stars just start to pop up slowly but surely. And we see this glow over the mountains to the south. I was asking them, like, hey, do you know what that is? And they were like, well, I don't know. Is it like the moon rising? And I'm like, well, no, it's a new moon, so it can't be that. And so I go and I hop behind my camera and I take like an 8 or 10 second exposure. And then what pops up on my LCD screen is the very top sliver of the Milky Way. And I think I still have that photo. And if I do, I'll overlay it now. And I just see this little arm that goes to Rho Ophiuchi. And like at that moment, I was hooked on this hobby for life, because I couldn't believe that that was showing up. Like those images you see like in National Geographic and magazines and on the internet, that was on my camera and I captured it. And it was just like the coolest thing to me. And so I ended up shooting all night. I didn't know about composites or stacking or any of that. So the couple images I'll overlay were just single individual images. But like I said, I was never the same after that, and I knew this was going to be a hobby and an adventure that I would embark upon for the rest of my life. So that's the first place. The second I want to talk about is the first deep space photo that I took. And so I was living in Arizona now, and so I had dark skies all around me, and I'd been out several times shooting the Milky Way, kind of perfecting that. But the same itch I got when I was doing regular photography to shoot the Milky Way, I all of a sudden had to do deep space. And so I did a little bit of research. I ended up renting 2 Skyguider Pros, because at this point I had a Nikon Z72 with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and I still had my D750, which was my first camera, and a 50 mil lens that I was going to use to shoot like a more of a close-up of the Milky Way. And so we went to the number 2 and the darkest place I've still been to this day, in Gila National Forest, Cosmic Campground Night 1 and Juniper Campground Night 2. Now Cosmic Campground is cool because, as the name suggests, it's actually set up for astrophotographers. There are these big round cement blocks that are there for you to set a tripod on, and they're pretty much perfectly level. Now, because I was so obsessed with having absolutely no light pollution, there were actually some campers parked there. And so me and the girl that I was dating at the time actually drove down the road a couple miles, because I didn't even want like lantern light in my photos. And I'm like 6'2", so I'm trying to like get underneath the Skyguider Pro and look through that little polar scope, which is an absolute nightmare. And I really tried all night and I could not get it to go. I would get these like, it was working a little bit, but the stars were really streaky, and I couldn't get it to work. I had no experience, nobody helping me. I was just figuring it all out on my own. And then night 2, we went up to Juniper Campground, which is almost 10,000 feet. So it's like Bortle 1, new moon, 10,000 feet, and the sky was perfect. And it was like crazy dark. As blown away as I was when I saw the Milky Way for the first time at Eureka, I'd been to like, Zion and Yosemite and some other national parks that have Bortle 2, and they, none of them had really compared to that first trip. Well, this like set the new bar. It was unbelievable. Like you can almost start to see the color in the Milky Way. You can see the Milky Way so crystal clear with your naked eye. It's unbelievable. Like you could spin around and you can find it in 2 seconds. It's like this big, it's not even like white anymore. Like you can start to see like detail in it. It's crazy. And I finally got the 200 mil working. The 50 mil was working obviously because it's a lot easier to shoot At 50 mil, it's a lot more forgiving, and I ended up getting an hour of data and got this close-up image that actually was pretty good. For my first time using a star tracker, I was pretty excited about that. And then I got 12 minutes. I got 6 2-minute images of row of Fuki, and I probably could have went way less time, like 60 seconds, given the conditions with a fast lens, and been fine. But I really wanted to challenge myself to get 2-minute exposures, and I ended up with this as my first deep sky image ever. And so I had no idea really about stacking software, so I had to figure that out, calibration frames, and I basically did it all in Lightroom and Photoshop and just kind of figured it out. So the processing isn't amazing, but for my first image and for so little data, I think it turned out okay. And from that point on, I went all in on deep space astrophotography. So after that trip, like literally that week, got a 2600 MC Pro. It was 2020, so the supply chain situation was like very real. So I couldn't find like a good mount anywhere. I ended up buying one of the Skyguider Pros, but I wanted one with like go-to and more substantial features. So I drove down to STARIZONA, which is like 2 hours from Phoenix, and they had a used CGEM 2 mount, Celestron. I got an ASIAIR, the 2600 I ordered, and then I got a Red Cat from them. And so now I had like a legit little setup. I bought all the William Optic upgrades for the Skyguider Pro. And so I had these two little rigs that I was trying to get to use. And luckily I had good sights all around me, and it was the summer. And so I'll talk about my third location, which I've also been to many times, and that's up on the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, and it's basically between Payson, which is an hour and a half northeast of Phoenix, and Show Low, and it's at elevation. And so you go from like the desert of Phoenix up to again like Ponderosa Pine, Whitecap Mountains, and it's a great place to get away from the summer heat. It would be about 20 degrees cooler up there, and again it's Boreal 2 skies, pretty solid. And the only issue is right on the rim. It's a beautiful view. I talked about this in my first dark site video, but you have that warm air coming up from the valley hitting the cool mountain air, and so that creates kind of a turbulent air condition. So I would go a little further back to Bear Canyon Lake, which is a couple miles off, and actually get better results. It's also a little higher up. And then there's another lake there as well that I did a Milky Way image. So I would go there like every month basically during the summer. And then the next favorite location would be my winter spot, and that was at Kofa Wildlife Refuge. So that's in the other direction. It's about 2.5 hours straight west of Phoenix, and it's down low, like at the same elevation as the city. And so in the winter, it's still in the 60s and 70s, even at night, and, 80s and 90s, during the day. And so that was a great winter location, and it's a 600,000 acre park, and it's almost like a mini Death Valley because it's flat in the middle, and then it's surrounded all the way around by mountains. So you kind of drive in the entrance, and then you're surrounded all the way around by mountains, and they have these really cool cacti, and so it's a great place to shoot the Milky Way. And I've actually taken several of my friends out there to see the dark sky for the first time, because the weather there, it's almost always clear, like 300 plus nights a year you can shoot there, and there are no clouds, and it's amazing. Up in the mountains you get a little bit more turbulent weather, but that was like the go-to. And so sometimes I would even go there in the summer, and it would literally be like 95 degrees at 2 in the morning. So sleeping was not really much of an option. So those are like my monthly go-to for all year round. And so I got really familiar with both of those. The next place that's kind of near and dear to my heart is kind of just the state of Utah in general, which I know is kind of narrow it down a little bit, but I've been to Zion National Park several times, Bryce Canyon, Monument Valley several times, and then Arches. So it makes like a big kind of J through the park or through the state, and you get really great skies at all of them. Zion has the sedimentary mountainous rocks. It's really beautiful, amazing hiking. You also have great hiking at Bryce Canyon, totally different rock structures. Those really tall, thin, like cathedral-like spikes that you get a little bit in Sedona, Arizona as well. Amazing hiking, breathtaking views, Great Milky Way foreground, probably closer to Bortle 3 there just because of, some of the surrounding towns. And then on the way up to Moab, you've got Monument Valley, which has just those epic plateaus, which again makes great Milky Way foreground. You see a lot of people do really long exposure shots of people driving through the kind of curvy roads with the Milky Way over the top. And then going further up to the northern part of the state, you can hit Arches, which is right outside Moab. Now, Moab's really cool because if you like mountain biking or ATV, all of the Utah destinations is there's other stuff to do. So if you're planning a trip, you really can't go wrong with any of them because there's a lot of stuff in the area. And Arches is great, obviously, because of the formation, super dark skies, and they have a no light pollution like thing in the park. So you can't light paint, or like you have to be really conscientious of light, and people will call you out for it. But there's great hiking there, great views, and really dark skies. So I've been to all of those places at least a couple times, and they're definitely some of my favorite places to go and places that I'll go back to. Just wanted to do a different type of video. I was getting a little burnt out on some of the gear reviews and the processing videos. Hopefully you can get out to some of these locations. Some of the honorable mentions would be like some of those national parks. Yosemite is really cool. It's great because you can drive through the whole park in like an hour, and it's like the most epic landscape you've ever seen. It's so powerful. It's like the most powerful national park I've been to. But there's tons of nooks and crannies too, and there's a really cool story of my friend and I actually going down a closed road, down a closed path, warm bear feces, foot tracks, and a lot of fear. Maybe save that for another day. Mojave Desert is really dark skies. Not a lot to do there, but great for just astrophotography. I do have some cool pictures there. I got a campsite at a little bit of elevation, so that was a really good place. At that time, I was only shooting the Milky Way again, but that was a really good spot to go to if you're in the California area, where you can still be in California but get almost no light pollution. And the final spot would probably be the Grand Canyon. I've been to the North and South Rim, and I've actually whitewater rafted it for like a 14-day trip. And if you're in the interior, if you actually get to whitewater raft it, obviously you're not going to be able to bring your telescope equipment, but you want to talk about absolutely no light pollution. Like, we saw so many shooting stars, it was like literally starting to get boring. It's like at first you start to count them, and then you're like, yeah, they're like every 10 seconds, so this isn't even that exciting anymore. But you can camp right on the rim, and it's a great epic view for sunset. And even though it was in Arizona, for some reason I just didn't end up there a lot. It was a little bit further than some of the other places, but not any darker than the places I was able to go. And so those are some of my honorable mentions. Hopefully that helps. If you have any specific questions about any of them, let me know. And if you're still watching, you can let me know by putting your favorite dark sky site in the comments below, or one place that you'd like to go that you haven't yet. So stay tuned for my travel video coming up this week. Hopefully I do go up north here in the next couple days, weather permitting. And in the meantime, clear skies.